Hello and welcome to Gardener's World. Now, my new greenhouse is coming on so well. I was really hoping it would become a jungle by the end of the summer, and it is. My turmeric that I potted on is doing incredibly well now, putting on lots of new growth. But as the weather cools down, I'll probably take it indoors for the winter because it's very tender and very precious to me. The tomatoes that went in really, really late have not done so well. They've produced lots and lots of green growth and some green tomatoes, but very few have ripened. I'm going to leave them on just in case we have some more nice weather, and with the windows and the doors shut here, hopefully this little corner is still sunny in my garden, they might ripen. But I think just to give them a bit of extra chance, I can remove some leaves and then hopefully the sunlight will get to them. If that doesn't work, I can pick them and put them with some bananas which release ethylene, which is a hormone that ripens fruit. And if that still doesn't work, I'll just have to make green tomato chutney. It makes a good Christmas gift. Coming up on today's show.
Rekha shares her successes and failures in her new garden in the Peak District, including advice on how to grow saffron.
Not every crocus is edible, so it is really important to get the right one. But what they need is the same growing conditions.
We meet a plantaholic who's turned his backyard into a botanic garden.
I've actually seen this same species growing in the wild in Borneo, and it totally blows my mind that I can grow the same thing here in my garden in London.
Errol Reuben Fernandes visits a vibrant contemporary garden at the Hepworth Wakefield Gallery in West Yorkshire.
I was interested to visit this garden because of the dialogue between the art and the garden space and its relationship with the local community.
And I have a busy day at work, as well as popping down to the allotment to pick my raspberries. The rest of the garden's actually coming on pretty well, except for my lawn. I've been cursed by rain all through the summer, as we all have, but every time I've tried to do the garden, it seems to have been raining, and in such a small space, you're constantly walking across it and trampling it. So it's really patchy. I'll probably reseed it, so rake it and sow some seeds in the next month or so. Autumn's a good time for that. And if that doesn't work, maybe rethink the lawn. This one rose produces good hips. It's the only one that does it. So that one will stay because I use them for making cough syrups and things in the winter. And the planting is pretty much done. I've planted everything, but then I've gone out and bought some extras. So I've got some Pennisetum macrorum, which will catch the light really beautifully. Also Verbena bonariensis, which I'm hoping will seed itself all over the place. And this, which is Devil's Bit scabious. Really beautiful. It's a native scabious with really small, compact blue flowers, but it grows all over Dartmoor, so I'm hoping it'll be very happy in this environment.
Like me, Rekha has also been getting to know her new garden. She's moved from London to the Peak District, and it's been a huge learning curve.
Starting a garden in a new location often comes with challenges and hopefully renewed inspiration. It certainly has in my kitchen garden. Back in spring, I said this was going to be one big experiment. I wanted to see how things would grow, how I'd use this space, and what would work in every level. It has been a good experiment. And I'm already planning for next year. It became clear early on that cooler temperatures and a wet July were great for greens. My peas popped madly, along with kale, spinach, garlic, and most recently, my leeks. But the onion harvest has been superb in all its forms. And these are my seed heads of Rose de Roscoff onion. I grew them last year and I'm growing them from the saved bulbs. They're the most juiciest onion I have grown. And they've got a really blush pink skin and I'm really amazed the way they've grown. The heads are full of tightly packed seeds, which shows that they were well pollinated. And the plants are easily twice the height of any I grew in London. In fact, I've had to string them up in such a zigzag way just to help them stay upright. But I think it's the soil that has really worked on them. My outdoor tomatoes have been a mixed story. In the rain, my usual favourites and even an early variety was slow to start and then got blight. But down by the greenhouse, it's very different. So this is my favourite tomato, the Burmese sour. That beauty is Costaluto Fiorentino. The reason why they've done so well is this place bakes in the summer. It's like a little microclimate of its own. And I think I have found the perfect position for my tomatoes to grow. I think the smile on my face tells you I'm going to do it again. It's such a big part of having a new plot, learning which spots work for different plants. And some of my flowers have made their feelings very clear. One thing I've discovered is these top two tiers don't get as much sunshine or heat or warmth as the lower down ones do. And my rudbeckias are completely unhappy. So are my brunneras. One thing that the walls were actually telling me is that the ferns are enjoying this space. Now ferns like shade, and so I think it'll look really nice when I put things like hostas in here so that there's leaf texture rather than leaf colour that I will enjoy. Quite soon I'm going to have extra sunny spots because at the bottom of the slope I want more of the cottage type feel, with plants falling onto paths. That is what I call the Rekha spillage, and I'd like to create that over here, and I think I can. The idea is I would like to put a path straight down here leading to the bottom, but it's the plants that are going to do the talking. It's just a massive space with so much sunlight on them that I know this is the section where I will find the most joy. That's doing well, but I think this is going to do even better, and I can't wait. At this time of year, it's a lot of harvest and seed saving. The French beans are drying nicely, but I do have a special bulb planting ritual about now. This is a crocus corm. It is not your ordinary crocus. This produces saffron. Saffron, the coloured strands used in cooking, is the unusually long stigmas of Crocus sativus. Not every crocus is edible, so it is really important to get the right one. But what they need is the same growing conditions as other crocuses, and that's what I will be providing them. That means a mix of peat-free, multi-purpose compost and grit, as they like free draining soil. And they go about 10 centimeters down in a large container. They were introduced by the Romans and brought to this country specifically in the east of England because they found that area to be dry in the winters but very cold, and that is one thing crocuses need to grow, and that's where the name Saffron Walden comes from this little corm. There's 3 stigmas per flower, which are hand-picked. It is why it is so expensive to buy, but it is so pleasing to grow your own, and the joy comes out when you actually see the flowers and want to pick them. Growing old favourites like saffron is reassuring in a new garden. But for me, keeping the planting simpler has helped too. I only grew a third of what I would normally grow on this plot, but that's because I wanted to keep my disappointment small. It's the slow and steadiness that has helped me get to this point in my head. I can already see how this plot will look next year, and it is giving me that excitement that it always does. The allotment did that for me every year, but this time, this plot is doing it for me, and I can't wait for next year.
It's so lovely seeing Rekha's new garden. Having visited her allotment and seeing that enthusiasm still coming through, I'm excited to see what she'll do in the years to come.
Here at Sharpham we have two orchards. This is the old orchard and the very, very steep orchard, and they're full of all kinds of fruits. We have apples and lots of pears, some of which we know the names of, others that we're trying to identify. A lot of the pears that we have in this orchard are traditional perry pears, so for making alcohol with, which means they're not always quite as tasty as eating and dessert pears. But they're really, really beautiful, some of them. Make you want to eat them and then regret that you did. This is such a lovely apple. This is called Sops in Wine, and it's quite an early one, but actually it stays ripe for a long time. Normally early apples go over very quickly. This one though is delicious, and if you cut it open, should have a reddish flesh. It's absolutely lovely. But this will keep going, so we're October now, and it's still really tasty. And this is a windfall, a very, very nice apple. About 90% of traditional orchards in Devon have been lost. So we're really lucky to have this. And it's full of lots of local heritage varieties, which is amazing. And we think that this one here is called Cox's Pomona. So it's quite flat, quite interesting flecked marks. And it's pretty tasty as well. Every year is different. And last year, in the extreme drought that we had, it was a very good year for apples, and they were deliciously sweet. This year, they haven't ripened so quickly, and the flavour isn't quite as sweet. We've still got a really good harvest from them. Now it's time for one of your films, and this is a good lesson in utilising space, even on a steep slope like this.
Hi, my name's Heidi. I live in Winchester in Hampshire, and I'm hoping to encourage gardeners everywhere to give their front gardens a little love. When we first moved here, the garden was just a sloping lawn with a hedge at the bottom. So in 2019, we decided to get some help to change the slope into 4 terraces held back by corten steel, giving us much more scope to add interesting planting and to actually use this relatively generous space.
It had always been our intention to put the hedge back in here at the bottom of the garden, but when people started to stop and talk to us about it, we realised that they were enjoying seeing the transformation too.
With the planting, we've tried to choose colours which complement the corten steel, so we've got plenty of evergreen foliage, lots of grasses, predominantly red and yellow and orange perennials such as geums and crocosmia, and some white accents such as a white agapanthus and fuchsia and penstemon. And then we've got 2 beds which we use for seasonal planting: tulips in the spring, dahlias in the summer, and things like cyclamen and primulus in the winter.
I'd be genuinely delighted if anybody watching this felt motivated to give their front garden a little love, bringing themselves and many others joy in the process. Thanks very much for watching, and happy gardening.
Well, I think the garden looks beautiful, Heidi, and it's so lovely sharing it with all those people who walk by, because gardens are really about sharing. Speaking of which, Wendy, I have some apples for you. Apples, and a few pears in there as well, actually.
Nice pears.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure. This is our woodland garden, and it's a part of the garden that we actually don't know that much about the history of, but there are some incredible species here from all over the world. So this beautiful Douglas fir, which is a North American species, and the size of it show it's obviously really old, but we don't know exactly how it got here or when it got here, but it's absolutely magnificent. And there are loads of Asian species too. So we have Davidia involucrata, there's Cornus cusa, we have loads of magnolias, loads of camellias. And something that I'm working on is speaking to lots of people, trying to build up a picture and put that history together, as well as identifying all the trees that we do have here. This one is one of my favourite species. This is Luma apiculata, or Chilean myrtle. It's from Chile, and it's a really beautiful tree. It has evergreen leaves, it has lovely white scented flowers, and then these dark berries that the birds actually enjoy as well. But what it really has is this incredible orange bark. What I want to do here is expose some of that bark, so as you walk along the pathway here, you'll see it. But I don't want to be too heavy-handed. I have a tendency when I get pruning to really get pruning. And here, it's all about gentle touches. So removing some of the evergreen foliage without taking too much, because I can always come back and do another prune another day. So I've got some clean secateurs, also a saw and some loppers if I need them. And then I'm starting with these lower branches just to almost raise its skirt a little bit. When you're pruning anything, always remove things that are dead like this. It's always best to take things right back. So for this example, there's a lot of dead on this branch, so I'd follow that back to here. That's going to leave a lot of exposed stem. And actually, you find the best place to take it back to is right up here. Having stepped away, I think actually it does need this one come right back to the stem. And because I'm taking the whole thing off, it's really important to get a clean cut for the health of the tree. So that means a sharp saw and taking it back to just before this bulge here. So if I left about this length on, that would just die back and potentially infect the rest of the tree. So getting as near as you can without going into that bulge will be helpful. And also, because these are old trees and they're really precious, we disinfect all of our tools between each different one so that we're not passing any disease around. This is called raising the canopy of a tree, and you can do it with loads of different things. It works really well with camellias and lots of shrubby things. Even conifers, actually, you can sort of raise them up, but it's a really nice way of opening up a tree and giving yourself a little bit more sunny ground underneath to plant in as well. Now, I love the rare species we have here, but Jonathan Gregson has taken it to a new level in his garden.
The diversity of plants in the world just totally blows my mind. And I try and grow as wide a range of plants as I possibly can. And I just love researching the stories and the botany behind all the plants that we grow here. My name is Jonathan Gregson and I live in Camberwell in South London with my husband Rob. Welcome to our garden. I mainly work as a botanist at the Royal Horticultural Society and the Chelsea Physic Garden. Botanists group plants that are most closely related to each other into plant families, and there are about 500 different families of flowering plants, gymnosperms and ferns in the world. And in this garden, we've got plants representing about 250 of those families. So in that sense, it must be one of the more botanically diverse backyards in the country, I would imagine. We moved here about 10 years ago and inherited a total blank canvas as far as the garden was concerned. We've been gradually developing the garden, breaking it up into discrete spaces and adding paths, patios, a pond and 2 pergolas.
Most of the time it doesn't get on my nerves. Or you go to the fridge and find it's full of trays of soil, or more plants arrive in the post and you think, well, surely there isn't space for any more plants.
And Rob's handwritten over 400 of these beautiful plant labels, which means he often knows the name of the plant before it comes to me. So this is my little micro-forest inspired by the rainforest of Borneo, which I've been really lucky enough to visit on several occasions. And one of the problems us plantaholics face is running out of space, and a great way of getting around that is to mimic the natural layering of the forest, and that way you can cram in far more plants. So for example here, we've got the emergent trees in my rainforest. This is Albizia dual-brissin in the legume family. And then below that, we've got a layer of shrubs such as this hybrid Schefflera, which is a hybrid between a species from Vietnam and one from Taiwan. So this is in the ivy family, and like ivy, the flowers are really attractive to pollinating insects. On the forest floor, we've got hardy begonias, aspidistras, busy lizzies, and ferns. And ferns are one of my all-time favourite groups of plants, and this is one of my favourite ferns of all. This is Sphenomerus chinensis. So it has these slender creeping rhizomes along the forest floor, from which it sends up these beautiful lacy fronds. I've actually seen this same species growing in the wild in Borneo, and it totally blows my mind that I can grow the same thing here in my garden in London. So this is my South American corner. Now, plant families vary hugely in size. Some have tens of thousands of species, and some only have 1 or 2. This is probably one of my more obscure plant families that I grow. This is Cyrilla racemiflora, which grows in the tropical Americas, and it's one of only 2 members of the Cyrillaceae family. So this is a really interesting looking plant that's worth trying. It's called Erythrina christogoli, and in the wild in Brazil, it grows as a huge tree. And in the spring, throws up these vigorous shoots and produces these dark red, waxy, pea-like flowers, which give away the fact that it's in the pea family, the Fabaceae. I really love climbers, and they're great for bringing a tropical vibe to a space. And this fantastic climber is called Mandevilla laxa, or commonly called the Chilean jasmine, although actually it's not from Chile and it's not a jasmine. It's actually in the milkweed family, Apostinaceae, the same as that other jasmine imposter, the Tracheospermum jasminoides, the star jasmine. But I think why bother growing any of those when you can have this with its fantastic huge flowers and jasmine scent. It's a north-facing garden, so it doesn't get a huge amount of sun, which can be a challenge, but the central section is the most open and probably gets the most sunshine. So that's where I focused on trying to get the most colour from perennials and shrubs. And this lovely little lobelia is slightly unfortunately named Lobelia syphilitica. It grows in Central and Eastern North America, and it was thought that the early settlers from Europe thought it was a cure for syphilis. Probably the rarest plant in the garden is this Cuminia eriantha, which is found only on Robinson Crusoe Island, and it's also critically endangered in the wild. So gardeners can really help play a role in plant conservation, and a great example of that is Wallemia nobilis, the Wollemi pine, which is a member of the monkey puzzle family, which was previously only known from the fossil remains of its ancestors, but as recently as 1994, a small group of these trees were discovered growing in a remote canyon in Australia near Sydney. It's critically endangered in the wild because there's fewer than 100 individuals left. But a massive propagation programme has distributed plants all over the world to be grown by gardeners to ensure its long-term survival. I'd like to say thank you for being so patient and tolerant. But also we work together well as a team, I think, and we've designed the garden together and we exchange ideas. I guess the answer is I should stop collecting because the garden is full, but of course I won't, and there's always room for one more plant. All life on the planet depends on plants. They're endlessly fascinating and inspiring.
I've got plant collection envy, Jonathan. What an incredible garden. And I agree, there's always room for one more plant. Here in the veg garden, it's come to that time of year when things are beginning to go over, and this is just a lettuce bed that's bolted, and I'm going to clear it and begin to prep it for next spring. Now here, we are a kind of no-dig. That means narrow beds that you can easily reach across, little paths in between them, and we only walk on the paths, never on the soil. And we don't fully dig it over as you would in traditional vegetable gardening. So when you're no-dig, you might think that you can never use a fork. That's not how we do it here. What we do is try to really reduce how much we do disturb the soil, because we're trying to nurture the soil health as much as the plant health. All the fungi and the bacteria and the worms, the microbes that live in the soil are really beneficial to the ecosystem, but also to how well plants grow here. So what we do is just keep it to an absolute minimum. But there is no removing couch grass roots without a fork. So sometimes needs must. So it's just about doing it as carefully as possible. But once this is all weeded, all we do with this is stick a fork a full depth into the ground, wiggle it backwards and forwards, and then pull it out. And that's called aeration. And then we'll rake it level and mulch it with a good layer of mulch for the winter. And then that's it prepped until next spring. But there's lots more couch grass to get out before I get anywhere near that stage. Still to come on today's programme.
Errol Reuben Fernandes meets a community of gardeners building an oasis in Wakefield city centre.
It doesn't matter if you're a bit anxious, what sort of week you've had, you leave here just calm.
And we visit a garden in Devon filled with incredible autumn colour.
I think it's a surprise for many visitors to see so much colour in a border at this time of year.
I'm off to my allotment now, and it's a place that I love so much. It brings me so much joy. And clearly, Nick Fry, who sent us this next film from Brighton, feels exactly the same way about his plot.
Hi, I'm Nick, and welcome to my allotment. I've been developing the plot over the last 13 years. Built a couple of sheds, setting out areas for fruit, vegetables and ornamentals, and even have a bit of a vineyard. Not only is the allotment good for us humans, but I'm also doing my bit to attract wildlife to the plot too. So I've planted hedges, created a bug hotel, and I've deliberately left a small area uncultivated to give insects and other animals a place to live where they won't be disturbed. On a sunny day like this, there's no better place to be. By being on a slope and on chalk, the soil here loses water and nutrients really quickly. And while I've done what I can to collect water for irrigation, the important thing is to try and conserve as much of that water and nutrients in the soil as I can. So where I'm planting crops, I've laid a layer of compost on the soil surface in early spring, then mulched the ground with cardboard. By cutting planting holes through the cardboard and inverting plastic bottles with their bottles cut off, I've made it really easy to then water and feed the plants without disturbing their roots. The cardboard does a great job of slowing down evaporation and stopping weeds coming up. It also has the added benefit of giving us the time to sit down and to take in the amazing green spaces around us. I say cheers to that.
Nick, I love your allotment, it looks beautiful, and what a vineyard! Also, what an amazing view of the sea. Right, go on then, on your bed. In terms of how the allotment's been this year, it's a mixed bag really. So it's been incredibly wet here in Devon, and that's been good for things like celery, but it's also meant some things have gone over a bit more quickly. But today, what I'm really focusing on is this, which is my perennial veg bed. So perennial veg is something that I have always loved. Classics like rhubarb and asparagus, but then also the more unusual things I've got into over the years, so perennial kales. There's seed beet, which is this old seed head. But this bed itself, which I planted about 3 years ago, has become a little bit unruly. So what I want to do is clear a lot of the stuff that's here and then plant new perennial veg so it's a really functioning area. So first thing I think I need to do is a little bit of weeding. Which is easier said than done on my plot, because actually I've got so much stuff. It's hard to tell what's a weed and what's not. But what I do have an awful lot of is teasels. They're beautiful, they're amazing for pollinators, but they seed themselves absolutely everywhere. And every year I think, oh, that one can stay. And then every year it gets about 3 meters across and takes up the whole plot. So again, I'm going to be ruthless and get rid of them all. You? Right, stay there. The first new addition to this bed's this buckler leaf sorrel. Now sorrel's really interesting as a flavour. It's really high in vitamin C, so it has a really lemony taste. But unlike most perennials, which are usually kind of spinach replacements, this one is more of a salad leaf replacement. It's really tasty. And the buckler leaf sorrel just has smaller leaves. So it's going to go here and form a lovely mound of leaves at the front of this bed. This has been sitting in this pot for a few months in my garden, so it'll be very grateful to finally be in the ground. So this is a bindweed mixed in with Apios americana, and that is a North American member of the pea family, but it's a root vegetable. All members of the pea family produce nodules on the roots, and they're what fix nitrogen, which is why they're so good in crop rotation. And it's those nodules on this plant which actually are the tubers that you eat. Hope that there's going to be something to harvest. Fingers crossed. There we go. Not a huge amount yet, but that's okay. What I'll do with these is take them home because although they are fully hardy, these tubers don't like to be wet through the winter. So what I'll do is pot these up into compost and just keep them fairly warm for the winter and then bring them back in the spring and plant them out. But hopefully I can at least try a couple because they're supposed to taste like nutty potatoes, which sounds good to me. Now last year I went to the Horniman Museum in South London to meet their head gardener Errol Reuben Fernandes. But recently he has been up to Yorkshire to visit the Hepworth Wakefield garden.
Exploring green spaces and enjoying nature has been a passion of mine since I was a child. I've always loved the wonder and escapism that gardens can provide, especially when they offer an oasis of calm in a very busy city. I was interested to visit this garden because of the dialogue between the art and the garden space and its relationship with the local community. The garden has been nurtured by a team of volunteers led by Katie Merrington, who has been the cultural gardener here for the last 4 years. So Katie, your title, cultural gardener, I don't think I know of another cultural gardener.
Yeah, so the gallery really wanted to communicate that the gardener's role wasn't just going to be about cutting the grass or the hedges, but that it was also about sharing the wonder of the art and creativity that happens here. And of course, Barbara Hepworth, our namesake, she was born in Wakefield, and she really believed that sculpture grew in the open light and with the movement of the sun, and she preferred her sculpture to be shown outside. And so part of my role is the gardening and caring for the plants, but part of it is also being a welcoming, friendly presence in the space.
The building was designed by David Chipperfield and opened to the public in 2011. How did the garden come to be?
So when the art gallery was built and opened, this piece of ground was just an acre of flat lawn, and there was nothing on it at all, really. It wasn't much to look at, and it wasn't very inspiring. It didn't offer anything for nature nor for people, really. It was very important they wanted it to be open 24 hours a day and to feel generous in that way so that you could come and find peace and tranquility here whenever you needed it. The most important thing was that we wanted the garden to have real year-round interest so that you could come back every few weeks and you could see something new. And then the garden designer and landscape architect Tom Stewart Smith, his design was chosen primarily because we felt he really did deliver a garden that would change all through the year so that there would always be something new to see.
And it's not easy to do, and it seems to have been achieved so well here.
Really, it's these herbaceous perennials that are always shape-shifting and they're always up to something. So this Errol is a bed that I really like at the moment. It's absolutely full of herbaceous perennials.
It's absolutely beautiful. I love it. I love all the undulation and the different variation of flower form and that yellow making its way through the border and drawing your eye towards the building. It's really, really stunning. That archilea, the big flat head, and then how the coreopsis is sort of self-seeded through. It's stunning. Really, really lovely.
You know in the Olympics when they do the relay and they hand the baton between the runners, and it might start off in the Asphodeline labernica, which is now just a bobbly seed head, and then it comes into the achillea, and then the rudbeckia, and then it's now in the coreopsis.
So as one fades, it sort of passes the baton to the next. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
But I also quite like here in the foreground how you've got that centre of that Eurybia, the yellow centre, sort of picking up and drawing your eye to the yellow further into the border.
It works really well. It ties it right across, that little dot of yellow.
Works so beautifully. It's really, really stunning. I can see why it's a favourite.
Thank you.
The volunteers that work alongside Katie are the backbone of this garden. One of today's jobs is smartening up the beech hedges. You guys are clearly doing some amazing work here. I'm interested to know how you benefit from volunteering and working in a garden.
It doesn't matter if you're a bit anxious, what sort of week you've had, you leave here just calm. It's just a wonderful place. We're very lucky.
What I really enjoy is the changing of the seasons and just seeing the garden change, sometimes week by week, month by month, seeing the new spring bulbs emerge, which we planted several years ago, and year after year they come up, they reward us. It's just utterly joyful to see the carpet of blue, white. We're part of this, and it's been so, so special. It gives back to us every little bit that we put in.
I love the fact that a garden that is so well maintained is free and openly accessible to the public. Living in a city, not everybody has access to a garden or a green space. So a space like this that is openly accessible to everybody feels so valuable. And I love that parallel of a community of plants in a garden that's being nurtured by a community of people. This garden is truly special.
I couldn't agree more, Errol. Spaces that are full of healthy, beautiful plants are often so much better for people as well. Now, I am just harvesting some of my autumn raspberries, and the wet weather has meant that some of them have rotted on the branches, but I am still getting a really good harvest from these. The birds don't bother to eat them. I can pick them from about July until probably November on a good year. And I don't know what kind of raspberry they are because I inherited them with the plot, but they're absolutely brilliant and I would not be without them. I'm also incredibly pleased because this year I have grapes for the first time. So this one is called Lakemont. I got it because it's supposed to be a grape that does very well outside, and also it's supposed to have a flavour a little bit like a muscat grape. Here, they're actually a little bit more sour, but I think it's because it's quite shady and they like to be really baked by the sun. But it's just so lovely to have them and they're still delicious. I've thinned them, as you can see, there's quite a lot of holes to try and get a really good crop. But I've got 2 really good bunches and 2 other not quite so good bunches, and I am pleased with that. I may have been surprised by my grapes doing well, but I am not surprised that my hops have. They like it sheltered, but also something they have here is very lovely, rich and deep soil, which is what they need. Hops have very, very long roots and they like good, rich soil. I have a few different varieties here. I have Jester, Prima Donna and Chinook, but I don't brew. I'm not a brewer. So what I tend to do with these is actually pick them, dry them, and then put them into little lavender cushions, but hop cushions instead, because they're very good for helping people get to sleep. Now you might remember that I was having some real trouble with my pond. It was completely overgrown with huge plants. So I'm now off to a specialist nursery to get some advice about what plants are better suited for a pond of my size. In the meantime though, we went to visit James Granger in a garden in Kingswear, just down the road from here.
This is Colton Fishacre. It dates from around 1925, 1926, and it was constructed by the d'Oyly Carte family. Both Dorothy and Rupert d'Oyly Carte were keen gardeners, and they collected a lot of plants from their travels, which they incorporated into this garden. This was a space where they escaped from the city and came to relax. Seven years ago, I was here as a visitor, and if you'd said to me, would I be head gardener in 7 years, I would say absolutely not. So these are our hot borders, which are more of a reflection of Rupert d'Oyly Carte's likes. He loved the bright colours, the flamboyance, the exotic, and that's what this border reflects. So one of the examples of one of the more tender plants we've got is this Ricinus communis, which is the castor oil plant. We grow it as an annual, purely for the foliage, just to add a bit of drama into this border. So this is Canna brasiliensis, and at this time of year, you have these really nice architectural seed pods, some of which are starting to burst open now. And we would either collect these and store them in our nursery, or we can leave them to self-seed in the border itself, and that means we'll get Canna brasiliensis popping up throughout the border. So this is a plant called Cufea cyanea, and in this garden it's reliably perennial, whereas in most parts of the UK you would probably treat it as a tender perennial and have to propagate it from one year to the next. One of the things that I particularly like about this plant is that it looks a little bit like a shrimp when you look closely, which adds to its charm. I think it's a surprise for many visitors to see so much colour in a border at this time of year. Normally the expectation is that gardens start to wane after the summer holidays, but actually this border is at its best and will keep going through October. This is the Rill garden. Originally it was a rose garden, but roses don't tend to fare too well in this part of the country. So the planting scheme now is largely hardy and half-hardy perennials, interspersed with some roses as a nod to the original planting scheme. A lot of the plants in this border are at their peak at this time of year. So the Salvia leucantha, I like it because it's on the cusp of what we know we can grow outside, so we like to push the boundaries. It's got an amazingly beautiful flower, which is really tactile. Whenever I walk past it, I always have to give the flowers a little rub. This is Physostegia virginiana, which is also known as the obedient plant, and it has several seasons of interest. At the moment, it's got these really interesting lilac flowers, and one of the quirky things about it is you can manipulate the individual florets and just move them around. The Japanese anemone is a wonderful plant for a whole host of different spaces. It will tolerate dry shade to full sun. It has beautiful flowers in early autumn. So Honorine Jobert is the white-flowered cultivar that we grow in the Rill garden, and that in shady conditions really pops. In the Rill garden there's one rose, Crown Princess Margarita, which is yellow. And in terms of the cohesiveness of the design, the yellow just jars, for me, a little bit. In the last couple of years, we've changed the way that we garden to question pretty much everything that we do and just ask ourselves, why are we doing this? So now, rather than cutting the border down for winter, mulching it and making it look nice and neat and presentable, we now leave the herbaceous borders until about April and then do one cut and weed to prepare the border for the coming growing season. One of the main reasons we do that is for making an area that's beneficial for hibernating insects, particularly ladybirds. So by leaving a lot of debris on the borders, we found that our ladybird population has bloomed. We're trying to maintain this garden as an ecosystem rather than a garden. So we're working with nature rather than fighting against it. So this is a border that we redesigned and replanted in April of this year in response to climate change. Having removed all of the previous plants, we laid 8 tons of sand as a surface mulch and have planted with a combination of plants native to the Mediterranean, but also plants that are found on the local coastline here. So we know that they're well adapted to the local conditions. We added a surface mulch for several reasons. One is to create really difficult growing conditions, to encourage the plants to put down really deep roots so that during periods of drought, they can access the water further down in the soil profile. But a secondary benefit is that it's really good for solitary bees, lizards and other insects that thrive in that kind of harsh environment as well. When I was at school, gardening wasn't a career that was really promoted, so I went through the traditional route of A-levels, university, and then getting a job in an office. And it took me a while to actually realise that doing a job that you love is the most important thing, and it can bring so much happiness. You spend so much of your time working that you might as well do something that you wake up and actually get really excited about doing on a day-to-day basis.
I'm ashamed to say, even though it's just down the road, I've never actually been to Collerton Fishacre, but have intended to go for years. And now, seeing how beautiful it is, I must do it. But now, I'm going to buy myself some pond plants.
I'm not an expert in pond plants by any means, so visiting a specialist nursery is a must. David Kerr's knowledge will be invaluable in making the right choices for my garden.
Hi, David.
Oh, hello. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I've come to buy some plants from you, but in a bit of a conundrum, because I have a pond that's in basically full shade, so it's under a north-facing wall, about 3 foot long, 2 foot wide, and 2 and a bit foot deep.
Right. Well, you have a limited range of choices for that sort of degree of shade. It's not ideal, but I can show you some plants that would survive in that situation and give you some interest.
That sounds perfect.
First of all, you're going to need something to oxygenate the water.
Yes.
So, Hippurus.
I think that's beautiful.
So this is a native plant that will grow under the water. If it's not too deep, the top part of the foliage will project from the water like it is there, or it can be grown as a marginal plant. Obviously, if it's growing above the water, it can't oxygenate the water. It can only oxygenate if the photosynthesis is happening below the surface of the water.
Makes perfect sense. I'll definitely go for one of those then, please.
Good. Okay, fine. We'll put that there for a minute.
Excellent. Beautiful.
Now, that one there is Isolepis sonua, fibre optic plant. Although it'll tolerate being immersed to a certain level, it looks best when it's sitting out of the water like that, with the water level roughly here on the pot.
Okay.
You get little white flowers all over the ends of the foliage, and if you keep trimming it back, it'll keep on popping out new flowers and new foliage all the time.
Really? Even
so
in
quite
the
an attractive
winter?
little plant. Well, not so much in the winter, and in fact, I'm glad you mentioned winter because it's not that hardy. So
Okay.
it's quite a good idea to give that a little bit of shelter if it's really hard frost.
How do you shelter something in a pond? Do you just cover it with a bit of fleece?
Well, yes, you could cover it with a bit of fleece or just drop it down in the water a bit lower.
I suppose I'll be too shady to get away with a water lily.
I'm afraid a water lily is probably not the best choice, but I can show you something else
Okay.
and see what you think. This is water hawthorn.
Okay.
It's a South African plant, so it's not a native plant, and it is quite vigorous. So I would caution about putting it into any pond that's connected to a watercourse, because
Right.
seeds and bits of plants and young plants can travel down with the water and go into water where they shouldn't be. But it's a really good plant for a cool or a shady pond, because it prefers those conditions. You get these lovely vanilla scented flowers. It'll grow up to about 1 metre, 1.2 metres deep, with
Okay.
these oval floating green leaves, and it'll flower spring and autumn mostly,
Cold
but it
water.
will go dormant if the water gets warm. So it's the exact opposite of a water lily,
Okay.
really. So where water lilies do well, this won't, and
Okay.
vice versa.
Well, I think that'll do. Hopefully it will be happy in my
Okay, I think that'll do you well.
dark and dingy
And
spots.
you probably want some of the sort of traditional oxygenator that grows on the bottom of the pond. This is hornwort, which is Ceratophyllum demersum. This is a native plant. It doesn't ever make any roots, so it's really, really easy to look after. If you've got too much of it, you can just fish it out. It's not attached to anything.
Perfect. And that just keeps the water nice and clear and healthy.
It does indeed, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it
Well,
does.
thank you so much for your help. I would have been lost without
Righto.
it.
That's no problem at all, and I'll get some of this bagged up for you.
Amazing. Thank
Right.
you. This pond has been a little bit of a labour of love. What I've done is I've rebuilt the pond, I've made it a bit bigger, and I've put some pebbles in all around just to create wildlife escapes. And now it's just a case of filling it with the plants I've got to really bring it to life. This water hawthorn goes in the deepest part of the water, which is about 2 feet. It will look very pretty and it will cope in the shade. But then you have to put in your more marginal aquatics. So these are plants that like to have their feet in water, but their tops out of the water. And my favourite is Hipparchus, or mare's tail. And I have included little shelves around the edges of the pond so that plants can sit on them. Another plant that I really love in a pond is this. And it's a kind of sedge with beautiful little seed heads on the top. Really zingy colour, really, really pretty. And again, this is a marginal, so it likes to have its feet nice and wet all year round. Now, whilst I'm getting on with this, here are some things that you can be doing this weekend.
Before the autumn gales arrive, it's a good idea to inspect any newly planted trees you might have. Remove the grass and weeds growing around the base. And check that the tree tie isn't constricting the growth or rubbing against the bark. If it's too tight, loosen it slightly. Seed heads, like these teasels, look fantastic in winter arrangements when flowers are a bit thin on the ground. They last for ages too. For best results, harvest them on a sunny day. Tie them up in bunches and hang upside down in a shed or garage for a couple of weeks before taking indoors. Teasels are one of my favourites, along with alliums and honesty. Tarragon is an essential herb for me, but it has a habit of giving up the ghost if left in the ground over winter, and I'm not prepared to take that risk on my allotment. So what I do when I'm digging up plants is cut back the leaves, remove it from the soil, and put them in an old compost bag, ready to take home, pot up, and overwinter in the greenhouse.
Definitely feels autumnal now, and coming to the end of the first growing season in a new garden is really interesting. I think I've achieved a lot more than I expected. I knew I wanted a greenhouse so I could protect my plants for the winter, and I've got that, but I've also got lots of planting done. And although I'm not sure how it will look, you know, it needs time to establish and to bulk up and grow, it's a good beginning, and I can just let it evolve, because the one thing that I have with this is time. And gardens are never finished, are they? But that's it for this week. Monty's back next Friday at 8 p.m. at Longmeadow. See you then.